So thank you very much for joining us. So eGaming, it's fascinating. In case you weren't aware, it is now one of the most competitive sectors in the world. Now, global revenues topping about $190 billion last year. Now, to put that in perspective, that is larger than Hollywood films and music combined, and roughly about the economic output of the New Zealand economy last year. Now, of course, gentlemen, we've seen governments respond very differently in the last couple of years. We've seen some companies and governments who've been tightening controls around youth safety and monetization. We've also seen a lot of public investment in esports and economies. So Paul, I'm going to start with you. When we look at what's happening right now, are governments more at risk of over-controlling gaming or underfunding the infrastructure that we need right now? From a government and a strategic perspective, what are your thoughts?
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. I think maybe both, actually, might be interesting. I think that there's definitely been maturity in the market. I think that in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of sort of boom, bust, and boom, 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 and then, but I think I've seen a lot of maturity. And I want to give an example. The great example of India, which is fascinating because straight after here we're going to the Milano Cortina Olympic Winter Games, and straight after that at the end of the month we'll be in India for our global esports games. This would have been unimaginable. It's in Mumbai. This would have been unimaginable even a year or two ago. And then the Indian government came in and said they weren't quite sure on policy, youth protection, education, guardrails around this. So they did what many governments would do, which is they took a pause. Interestingly enough, some of you might have heard about the International Olympic Committee reaching the point of Olympic esports games, and again, they've taken a pause. So enter the Global Esports Federation, and part of our mandate we see is to, across our 180 member federations, not only countries, but also sports, traditional sports, helping them understand this incredible phenomenon across industry, government, and the sector, and our community around gaming. So that's something that we like to do. But the good news is it's those governance cycles, that maturity into the market is happening, and it's going to be much, much, much bigger than $190 billion in not too distant future.
And I mean, we've seen a huge shift, particularly in this part of the world in the last couple of years as well. Chris, let me bring in you here because you see the commercial impact of these decisions in real time. So what are your thoughts? Governments at risk of over-controlling or under-investing in the infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I agree it's a combination of both. One thing that governments really need to consider when thinking about games is that games are truly an interconnected digital economy. And the things that governments do that, and then they spoke a little on the previous panel about this, that may impact one sector, in games you have multiple sectors converging. You have consumer protection, you have privacy, you have data, you have fintech, right? On and on. You have children, child protection concerns. And all of these things are often approached in sort of for a particular vertical, but when you throw everything into the mix that is gaming, whether it's esports or video games in general, you get a lot of unintended consequences from overlapping attempts to address issues. And that can really negatively impact games businesses. An example of that is you have several places around the world that are trying to tackle gambling, right, when it comes to digital gambling. But the rules that are made for that have an unintended consequence of really potentially just kneecapping free-to-play game economies because there's a lot of randomness that happens within those economies. Not the intention, they're not gambling sites, but the downstream effect is that it could hamper significant economic growth from that industry.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Tarek, let me bring in you here because, again, when we talk about all the different levels that goes in, it's interesting about 60% of gaming revenue now comes from online digital purchases, things like virtual goods and subscriptions. So it means payments have to work instantly at scale and across borders. Now, Tarek, you've seen the real shift shift from global consumer platforms. You spent time at TikTok and Google, as well as Visa, where you are now. How have we seen the evolution, the big changes in payments, in digital identity, and the fraud systems, all of which Chris has just mentioned? How have they had to evolve to support the modern real-time gaming?
Yeah, so Chris talked about an interconnected digital economy, and that's absolutely true. I mean, the reality of how gaming has evolved is that it's gone from what used to be a fringe thing that we used to do as kids for a certain period of time, and then you grow out of it, into really an expression of culture. And we believe, and this is something that we've believed since our founding, where there is culture, there is commerce. And the intersection of those two things means that all the trends that we see in technology will amplify and accelerate in payments in the gaming space. So when we think about the future and how, there's been a lot of conversation around agentic commerce in this panel and in the previous panel as well. And the more gaming becomes immersive and flow, and it's not something that stops at rounds, it's something that is part of a completely immersive experience with a headset, the less friction consumers will accept in payments, because that friction represents a lack of progress, right? So it stops them, it pauses them, it sets them back. And so when we think about where agentic commerce is going and your ability to code an agent to make decisions on your behalf while you're in the game in a way that enables your progress rather than holds it up whenever you need to make a purchase. So we often talk about it's a little bit like having a virtual employee with a corporate card. But there are very clear rules that you've told it to do. You've only told it to purchase in certain contexts and so forth. And so I think that's kind of one very clear evolution that we see. And we've created a tech stack and an infrastructure called Visa Intelligent Commerce that allows gaming developers to connect with AI and agent-enabled payment credentials that allows for that flow to happen naturally. So that's one side. The other side of it is that there's a great deal, and you referred to it in the beginning, 60% of gaming is actually not the purchase of games, it's everything outside. But then there's also things that are even outside what we would conventionally think of as a gaming ecosystem. So gaming creators, for example, some of the biggest names on TikTok and YouTube are gamers, both in this part of the world and globally. And there's a lot of economic exchange that's happening between fans and those creators on those platforms. They're paying for tips, they're buying merchandise, they're going to meet fests, they're going to events to meet them in person. And so all of these things, all of them require frictionless payment, and all of them will probably become one of the earlier applications of agentic commerce, given the age and how connected the user set is.
Honestly, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And it's that seamless, frictionless experience, the Apple Pay experience we all want to be able to experience within a game. But I think, as well as the payment system, I think what's really interesting about the growth of gaming is also the big impact that it has on culture and identity. Rustin, this is where I want to bring in you here, because I know you work directly with global gaming IP, and you see directly how games shape taste, culture, and youth culture in real time. And some fascinating examples of what Japan and China have done. Japan really used gaming and anime as a cultural export. They had Cool Japan. China did something quite similar with Black Myth Wukong. And it was fascinating to watch this local mythology really turn into a global hit. What is it that makes gaming such a powerful cultural export in a way that film or television doesn't? And what should emerging economies be doing if they want to emulate this kind of success?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, thank you everyone for coming to this talk. Really appreciate it. What's interesting about gaming that I think a lot of governments don't understand is how emotional the experience and therefore immersive it can be. And what happens is that people get very connected to the IP that they play because of how involved they are with the experience. And so when you think about that connection, governments can really utilize that to their advantage. So I want to give an example of foreign policy and then domestic policy. From a foreign policy perspective, you mentioned the Cool Japan initiative. For those of you that are not aware, Japan has this initiative where essentially they believe that video games can be a soft power. And so they're investing into the local game studios to develop Japanese IP and then export it. So just as like a thought experiment here, how many people have heard of Pokemon? Just raise your hand really quickly. Okay, cool. That's obviously a Japanese IP. You can then think about the influence on your local population. If they like playing that game, they draw a very strong, positive, emotional connection to the IP and therefore the country. So then their adversaries will think twice about taking action against Japan. That's how Japan views the video game industry, which is quite fascinating. Now, from a domestic policy perspective, this is a really crazy one. Last year, the government of Nepal experienced a coup. And the way that these people organized was through Discord, which is a gaming social network. And so not only did this class of Gen Z gamers organize on Discord, they also voted for their prime minister through Discord, which is a historic first. So I think as a government, the question that you should be asking yourselves is first, are we exporting our culture or are we consuming someone else's? And then the second thing that you should be asking yourselves is, are we aligned with this community? Can we evangelize their values? Because as you can see, they can be a force multiplier due to their digital native background. So those are things that I would be asking myself if I were, let's say, running a government.
And it's fascinating, again, to just see how powerful gaming can be beyond the everyday control. Now, we've seen a lot of regional initiatives in this part of the world in the last couple of years. I think just last week, Dubai launched the Game Forward Accelerator. Really wants to build a big ecosystem. Saudi Arabia is also investing heavily into esports, and even France is revising some of the creative incentives there as well. Rustin and Sotoodeh, I wanted to get your thoughts. What do you feel really needs to sit behind these programs to ensure that they translate into long-term growth, into jobs, talent development, and international competitiveness?
Sure, yeah. So not a lot of people are aware of this. There's a seminal essay by Matthew Ball where he talks about the state of gaming. And essentially one conclusion that you can draw from this analysis is that the Western game studios are suffering from both a massive spike in expense in terms of how expensive it is to create a game. And then therefore, what's starting to happen is that the production of these games and their quality is declining. And so then this presents an opportunity for, let's say, opportunistic governments around the world to invest in their local ecosystems because these Western IP are declining, they're suffering talent loss. There's essentially a recession of sorts within Western gaming studios. And that then provides a platform for, let's say, a different economy to produce a new hit, which kind of brings us to the Black Myth Wukong example that you gave. It's a Chinese game. It's the first game at the Game Awards that was a Chinese title that was nominated for Game of the Year. And so what's also interesting is that MENA is now being presented as potentially a third of the future growth of the global gaming economy. So the Dubai initiative could be a really great accelerant of what I was just talking about previously in terms of foreign policy.
So, Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, and these are, I agree, I mean, fascinating discussion. These are, government can play that incredible role by acceleration, right? Accelerating. I remember very clearly when I got that phone call in about 2020, when, from my background in the Olympic movement, the whole world of sport stopped. It didn't pause, stopped. There was no sport. And so all the leaders of sport called and said, you know, Paul, what do we do? How do we think about this? As that's evolved, I think governments, and I'll give a couple of examples, governments can play incredibly meaningful roles by, in some cases, starting games economies in certain countries. Whether there was some panel discussions today, even in small countries that want to participate in this. The great news is everyone can participate in it. The challenge for government is to see what's our role. I don't think it's any more possible to say we don't have a role. I think that would be a disservice to citizenry. So I think the question and the challenge, and I love helping governments think about this, is what does your role look like? What does your economy look like? What does your community look like? And it should look like you know. And the good thing is some of the people up here, we can really be very, very helpful around that. The other thing that I think that is happening, I said it before, is that governments can play that role, that sort of strategic role, and then let the private sector flourish, let the private sector take it on, let the other aspects of government, for example, education, healthcare, financial services, join and move. But government can play a huge role in terms of accelerating that progress.
Chris, let me bring in you here because you work with game studios all over the world, and often when companies are looking to be able to move into new markets, there's a lot of very practical questions that go on. Can they monetize as designed? Can the players be able to pay across borders? Can they also follow the right compliance without having to rebuild everything? So when those calls are made, what are some of the things that they think about?
So, I think the main thing is predictability, and this was actually also spoken about on the previous panel. So and even the before that. So it's a common theme, having predictability. It's not should there be regulations, should there not be regulations. Often it is just let me know what the rules are so that I can design around them, and I will design a system around them that works, right, and is compliant and follows the rules. When that is not there, or when it's a patchwork of different rules that often conflict with one another, that's what can really hamper the growth of a business and will often prohibit game companies from really leaning into a particular territory or region and investing. Because often what happens is if there is that predictability and a game company knows they can design around the system, right, and they can build a profitable business in a region, it's not just that they'll promote the game in the region, they'll often come in and set up shop in the region. Many games these days are these free-to-play games, they're lifetime games that they live on and on. People play them for years, if not decades. And to support that, there are large teams that get built. And the best way to support that is to put teams locally that can understand local culture and really expand the business. So there's a real flow, kind of a knock-on effect that happens from the initial ability to monetize predictably somewhere, and then eventually building up infrastructure to support that for the long term.
Okay, so lots of different levels to think about. Tarek, let me bring in you here, because we've talked a little bit about how the decisions are being made, and let's talk a little bit more about the payment system underlying that. I found it fascinating, Tarek, what you were saying earlier about agentic AI and these permanent virtual worlds where software agents are effectively transacting on your own behalf within the environment. Where are the biggest changes? What are the biggest changes we're going to see over the next 12 to 18 months when it comes to the new changes in payment and trust infrastructure?
Well, I think the payments in gaming is a very emotional experience as well, right? So it represents progress. It's quite a meaningful transaction that people are making. And so the anxieties around that tend to be the same anxieties that you usually encounter when you're making this kind of a purchase, right? Am I buying from a trusted source? And definitely the preference is to purchase from publishers and platforms. But then in many cases, it's not possible. So in some cases, you're buying from a third-party platform. And in that case, you're really concerned about trust, fraud. You're concerned about chargeback. You're concerned about a number of so elements that help decide how big the transaction is and how frequently you're going to make it. So I think what you're going to see moving forward is probably the integration of biometrics into this decision. So in this forum, earlier, there was a pilot launch of a biometric transaction. That's the kind of build that you're going to start to see with these tech stacks that are becoming available to developers, where developers can create seamless, frictionless payment experiences that are authenticated biometrically, so that the device and the human and the publisher know each other, and the rules are there that allow for that transaction to happen under particular circumstances. So I think you're going to start to see that come to life, especially with immersive gaming, as I was saying earlier. And then, underlying all of this is the same sort of elements that have underlined trust in payments for many, many years. Who am I transacting with? What network am I using? And can I get my money back if I've either made a mistake or it's been stolen, or my identity has been stolen? So it's the same underlying needs. So that's not going to change. But I think the form factor and the execution will.
Okay, interesting. So more trust, security, and biometrics. And in fact, we're seeing biometrics now being used, not just for payment, but also age verification as well. We look at something like Roblox. They have more than 150 million daily users. That's about half of Netflix's global subscriber base. And at that scale, design choices, I think, really matter. Rustin, I know you've looked at this a lot, the fact that that Roblox has recently rolled out facial age checks and age-based chat restrictions in places like Australia and the Netherlands and New Zealand. And at the same time, they've also been expanding IP partnerships. And I think it's fascinating because you can feel that there's a real balance that's needed at the moment and the challenges of scaling. How do you make sure that you can build a system that is safe enough for young users, that is still credible enough for global brands, and is also still open to be able to bring you that creativity and culture that people crave?
Yeah, that's a great question. What Roblox is running into is very frontier challenges because of the scale of their platform. Just to give you guys context, that number that she gave in terms of the amount of users, that's larger than Xbox, Nintendo, and PlayStation's user bases combined. So that is the future of gaming. That's the next platform. 60% of that audience is Gen Alpha, and the rest are Gen Z and above. And so that is a very odd and unique space that not a lot of governments are paying attention to, but it's posing a lot of challenges because you can imagine if there are people of that age and that globally connected, there are going to be some bad actors in that system. And so on the one hand, Roblox has hit some controversy, and that's why they introduced these age verification through face selfies. I think that it really just depends on your policy as it pertains to the sovereignty of an individual, like how much data do they want to be giving out to be able to access these services, but also from an economic perspective, and I think this is something that you probably are thinking about too. It's like, well, you know, how are these game studios monetizing? And this is a massive global platform, but it's closed and it's private. But your community is going to be on that platform. They're going to be transacting. They're going to be creating goods and services. So do you have a stake in that or do you not? And I think that really comes down to like how free of a market are you creating? And then on top of that, again, it could be an angle for foreign policy of like, I think Japan has a game on Roblox where you can visit Tokyo and experience the culture there. And so I think government should be looking at Roblox because Xbox, Nintendo, and PlayStation are for an older generation, and the new generation is going and playing on Roblox.
We've got a couple of minutes left. We have to talk about esports. Chris, so Paul, let me get your thoughts, because again, you know, huge investment from this part of the world, tremendous interest, and there's so many things we have to think about: prize money, sponsorship, media rights, as well as talent. Talk me through the biggest changes we're seeing there at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, esports are amazing. They're a great representation of gaming and how global it is. They are a fantastic way to really bring a lot of attention into an area in a region. But I would say one of the big things that has hampered some attempts with esports is thinking of it purely as a sport. And you know, esports are a little bit different. They are representations of existing games, but they do have massive audiences, and they truly are kind of their own unique ecosystem, and should be treated as such. And there are a lot of different variables. There's the digital part of it. There's the physical part in you know, real life, bringing people together. So I think a lot of opportunity, but again, people have stumbled in the past when they think of it as just, oh, we're going to do what worked in traditional sports and stamp that model onto esports. It's like, no, it really is a convergence of traditional sports, digital economy, gaming, fandom. There's all these unique elements that come together, but the opportunity is incredible.
So Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, despite the challenges of the world, we're living in this incredible moment of our lives. I mean, this is a very exciting moment to be alive and to be in our space, and particularly in esports and gaming. I think that all those people that came before us, fantastic, the work that was done, building the communities, the stickiness, the loyalty of the community is something incredible that makes me excited every single day. Governments want to be part of it. The United Nations system want to be part of it, and the Olympic movement wants to be part of it. And as I said in an earlier talk today, it's no longer a question of sport or esports. Most elite athletes are also gaming and playing sport, and the future of immersive systems and immersive sports where we can experience it all over the world is something that you know, I think that we're looking very much forward to contributing to. So I think there's something for everyone, and we're really excited about it. And I think that that story can be a national story, a local story, a city story, a community story, and it's just a very exciting time for our community.
Yeah, incredible transformation. Gentlemen, we're out of time. I'm going to give you 30 seconds each. Rustin, I'm going to start with you. As we look ahead to the next 12 months, what is one decision that you think government should take in order to make e-gaming and esports a real economic driver over the next 12 months?
Yeah, very simple. Invest in local studio infrastructure. Yeah, whether that's Roblox or AAA IP.
Tarek?
I think there's a ton of opportunity when it comes to sort of the biometric or digital identity and how payments can be a part of that, which would help with age verification, which would help with sort of seamless transactions on gaming.
Good advice.
I really think it's around getting clarity on digital assets and how they're treated and how they move around the world.
And I'd say accepting that gaming's a thing. It doesn't need to be a sport or something. It's a thing, it's alive, it's vibrant, and unlocking the huge potential of this industry that's definitely going to fire up across the next 5 to 10 years.